you're gonna handle it.
Yes, sir. Right now, if y'all are ready, we're ready to go.
We're in here. Good work. Ladies and gentlemen, let me open a special meeting, City Council, City of Pearland, for Monday, October the 14th, 2019. And is this for the regular meeting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, item 8. Okay. Moving in our agenda to purpose of the meeting, consideration possible action, selection of proposed charter amendments to be submitted for the May 2020 election. And this is prepared for us by the Charter Review Commission with their recommendations. And our city attorney, Darren Coker, will be the staff lead on this particular one. So we'll follow your guidance as we go through the process of this particular special meeting.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Earlier this year, the city convened a charter review commission, which of course fulfilled their duties in reviewing the city's charter and making some recommendations. Those recommendations, the council actually accepted into the city's official record earlier this year as well. That did not mean that those were the recommendations that would be sent to the voters. That was just accepting their report and their recommendations. Those recommendations are actually on the screen before you now. The items 1 through 6 are the proposed recommendations. Tonight, if you recall, when we actually reviewed those recommendations, items actually 2 through 6 seem to be somewhat very general in nature and trying to come into compliance with law or to address some inconsistencies we have with the charter. But item number 1 was one that we knew would generate some additional discussion and need some clarity on how that would occur if the council wanted to go that route. And so that's the purpose of the meeting this evening, is to actually discuss these proposed amendments, which, if any of the proposed amendments, the council would like to proceed and move forward by submitting them to the voters in the May 2020 election. Tonight, Lawrence Provins, who actually worked with the Charter Review Commission this past basically January through May to develop their report, will be actually presenting the information and then leading the discussion on this. I think for all the time sensitivity we have here, knowing that we have a 6:30 council meeting, my hope was that we could actually focus on the discussion on items number 1 and then items number 7, 8, and 9 that are on the screen. Obviously, we can discuss all of them, but I think those are the ones that may generate the most discussion. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Lawrence for the presentation.
Before I begin, I believe there was one citizen who wanted to speak on this issue. I didn't know if you wanted to hear from the citizen first or if you wanted me to go through those recommendations.
We'll do it after staff presentation.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. So as Mr. Coker discussed, the Charter Review Commission presented items 1 through 6 to City Council and suggested that Council present these to the voters. There was discussion when they presented these at the public hearing. In regards to item number 1, I think that generated the most discussion, and that would change the term of office from council members from 3 years to a 4-year term. Item 2 would change the residency requirement to run for city council from 6 months to 12 months or a 1-year period. Item number 3 would change the misdemeanor fine amount from $200 to up to $500 if somebody ignored a subpoena issued by City Council in relation to a council investigation. Section 6.06 would be item number 4. That would change the time the city secretary has to review a recall petition for completeness from 5 days to 10 days. I believe the charter doesn't say whether it's business days, calendar days, or whatever it might be. And if somebody submitted a recall petition, say on the Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving, that could create some timing issues for us. We wanted to make sure that that was clear. Section 8.02 would require the budget to be adopted in accordance with state laws. The current reading of 8.02 has a plethora of things that it details have to be in there, but state laws already require those, so we were trying to make it easier and comply with state law. Additionally, it removed an artificial timeline for when the budget had to be presented that would be impossible to do because the city finance department would not have all the information in from the counties, the Brazoria County, Harris County, and Fort Bend County appraisal districts in time for us to comply with the law on that one. And then the sixth one is 10.15, which would change the Charter Review Commission from a 5-member body to a 7-member body. Since these items have been presented to City Council and the report has been accepted by that council, there were 3 new items that I did want to mention. Section 1.03 would change the annexation provision of the charter to reflect the city can expand its territorial limits subject to the procedural rules prescribed by state law. We had an issue after the Charter Review Commission met where the city was going to annex property that it owns, which is something that state law allows for already. But it would only, the charter says you can only do it if it is next to your city limit, whereas state law doesn't have that requirement. So if the city had property it owned in, according to state law, if the city had property in the ETJ, the city has the authority to annex that city-owned property. And using a surface water treatment plant as the example, now if somebody broke into the plant, instead of waiting for the county, DPS, or whatever other agency to come out there and respond, we would rather Pearland Police Department to be able to go out there and do the investigation or resolve whatever the issue is. Similarly with fire EMS or wherever else it might be. Section 3.09 would change the current requirement for a city council quorum from 6 members of the council, including the mayor, to 5 members of council, including the mayor. What we've seen recently in the last, I'm going to say 3 months, there have been times where if a council member needed to stretch his legs, take his call, use the facilities or whatever, we had to stop the meeting because we didn't have enough people because somebody was out for vacation, illness, work, or whatever else it might be. And as it stands now, the charter currently has a ratio in there. It's 2/3, and a ratio of 2/3 doesn't work well with 8 because you can't have 0.33 of a person. So going with the Charter Review Commission's reasoning for its recommendation number 1, it just made sense to change that ratio, and we chose the whole number of 5 folks. And then item number 9 for section 3.09 would require a record vote to pass ordinances and resolutions as opposed to a roll call vote. Some of you may have seen this in other cities or other legislatures where the city council pushes a button, and then whether it be, something aye or no, a display board showing it, or whether it be a red or a green light, it shows what everybody's votes are. But you don't have to go through the procedure of calling out each council member's name. So that's what that proposed change was meant to address, to facilitate that. And one of the reasons why the city was looking at that is the city secretary's office has looked at adopting a new voting procedure, and a lot of the technology advancements use some sort of voting board, but we couldn't use a vote board if we have to do the roll call vote as required in the charter. But it would still allow for all the citizens, including the people who have items in front of you, to see how each council member voted, and then it would accurately record what those votes are, and everything would be documented in the minutes. So those are the three new ones that weren't considered by the Charter Review Commission because we hadn't been experiencing those issues or looking at those. Before I move on to item number 1 with a proposed transition schedule, I did want to ask if there are any questions about the the last three issues, which would be new issues that council had not spoken about.
Are we ready to discuss this as individuals?
In regards to the last three items, yes, sir. In regards to items 7, 8, and 9, yes, sir. That's what I'm asking about.
Okay, you're talking about 7, 8, and 9 at present time. Okay. I don't see a problem with I like the quorum issue. The records to pass, I'm not sure about what the roll call versus vote to pass, vote to pass, or roll call. But I probably need a little clarification on that personally. And would change the annexation provisions of the charter to reflect the city. That the city may expand its territory subject to the procedures and rules set by state law. I think those are good, except the only question I have is what's the difference between a record vote to pass? Is that what we're doing now?
No, sir. Right now we're doing a roll call vote. So for a roll call vote, the city secretary calls each council member individually. She calls her name like a roll call for a classroom. We'll say Councilmember Orlando and then record his vote. Councilmember Reed and then record his vote. So she has to go down the line announcing each member's name and each member has to vote. So that's a roll call vote. Instead of doing that, we would do a record vote. So it still gets everybody's vote. It still records everybody's vote, but you don't have to go down the line one person by one person. Instead, you'll say, would everybody please cast your vote? And as each person catches their vote, it would be on some sort of display board so that the public can see what those votes are. And then the city secretary will announce what the final tally was.
Are they still going to be asked for Orlando, for instance? When it comes to him, do you ask him to make his vote, or do you?
No, sir. The city secretary would just say, the item's been called. Would each council member please vote? Okay. And then each council member will push a button.
I kind of like the way we're doing it now, where we call on Orlando. Everybody can see who he is and what he voted for.
Mr. Mayor, all it is a proposal to change the charter to allow for, it doesn't mean you're going to change the process, but if someday it's decided that you want to use an electronic system to poll the council members, then all this would be is a change that would allow that to occur if you so chose to do so in the future. That's all that is.
Is that the case, though?
Would allow a record vote. And instead of using the word require, we would say we don't have the other options.
Yes, sir. We could make sure that says will allow a record. Well,
okay.
It would be required, but a roll call vote is still going to satisfy the record vote requirement. Okay. Because everybody's vote is still recorded.
Well, let's do some voting here, Councilman Rolando.
I'm sorry, you said vote or feedback?
Well,
feedback. I think this is good. In terms of number 8, I think there's going to be a little bit of cleanup required also to section 3.01. subsection B of that notes, the mayor shall not be included in any calculation of the number of votes needed for the city council to take any action authorized by this charter. So I think that's going to need to be updated to reflect. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. So this amendment, wouldn't this be including the mayor in that calculation?
The mayor's already included in the calculation for a quorum. The mayor's not included on the number to determine when a vote is cast, but it is included in the number for determining a quorum pursuant to section 1.01. I'm sorry, section
09.
09.
Only,
Or 09.
the only thing I call for is when we need a quorum.
Okay, yeah. With that in mind, then, and knowing that 9 would not require, but just give us the option to make that change, I think these are good.
Just read.
With respect to the 3.09 or number 9, I mean, I think that's definitely something that's needed, or at least we're asking about putting this up for vote, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't. I mean, we need to kind of catch up. I've seen other cities, not just in Texas, but in other states, gone to council meetings and they all do record the vote where everybody can see it. Just press a button, and so at least having that option, I think is good. As far as, and we're only talking about 7, 8, and 9, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've had to go to the restroom and had to wait for somebody to come back. So yes, I think that needs to change from 6 to 5, and other than that, I do think that these things should be presented. These 7, 8, and 9 should be presented to the public for vote.
I like changing the quorum from 6 members and the mayor to 5 members and the mayor. I think it keeps us from having to cancel meetings when 2 councilmen can't make it. Number 9, I'm all for. I kind of like the way we vote now, but it just gives us another option. I'll go ahead and put it for the voters. Number 7, I don't have a problem with.
Yeah, I'm in favor of all these as well. If I can, I guess one of the things I like about item 9 is specifically if we're all voting at the same time, it helps to cut maybe down some of the influence that we've seen maybe in the past where we've gotten down to the wire and the last person is the deciding factor and it may, influence their vote one way or another. So I think this is a good way to get everybody up here to kind of vote the way that they feel is in the best interest of the city and not feel pressured to vote one way or another. So I think that's going to be a very positive change for this body.
More.
I'm in favor, Mayor.
Perez.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I personally think the way that we vote now works well. However, I'm okay with us allowing the charter amendment so we have the option in the future. I just probably would not support actually making a change to the way that we vote.
Owens.
Yeah, that the only one I have a concern about is the last one on roll call and vote that way. And the reason being that if I got him walked out, knowing Perez, he would hit my button the way I didn't want it. I don't trust him on. He'd do the roll call. He'd do that for me. But
that would be illegal.
Well, you do stuff like that anyway. I mean, that makes no difference. But
Oh, I'm sorry. I hit your button. I apologize.
yeah. So we seldom agree on anything. So I didn't want start any trouble with that. But I think if you're going to vote on something, you're elected official. Let's see you speak about it and call out your vote. I know the state does the vote like that on that, but I'd rather hear the reason you're voting or on something negative or positive. So, and you don't get that with a green or red light.
That being the case, what I'm hearing from council is that these 3 things are all things that you're generally in favor of. One of them, you're okay with the option, but when we go to exercise that option, whether that be continuing with what we do now with a roll call or whether changing to some sort of voting board, we'd want to make sure that council is okay with whatever that change might be.
Okay.
For clarification, though, I think we would still be able to share our reasoning for voting a certain way prior to actually making the vote or pushing the button. So that wouldn't go away.
Yes, sir. You still have the deliberation, you still have the discussion, and then, as it happens now, one person would, the mayor generally says, okay, we've got a motion and a second.
So from a practical standpoint, let's say the chart, we add it to the charter gets approved. Now we have the option of doing a record vote as opposed to roll call vote. Would that, the way that this would be, the language of this would be written, or in past resolutions, the way the language would we be limited to making that change via council resolution before we could go to a different type of vote, or would we have a discussion of, what kind of votes we would have roll call, what kind of votes we would have? But all of that would have to be approved by council before we would move forward with a change. That would
Yes, sir. I would imagine that the council rules of procedure would be where you put that. And we would change that resolution with the council rules of procedure.
which would require council approval before we made
Yes,
any
sir.
structural change. Okay.
That information I
take-
wanted to transition on over to the first item, which was the proposed changes. Let me see if I can get this a little bit larger so that we can see a little bit better. But this is the term limit item. And I apologize, but I was trying to put a few different scenarios in front of us, and it may be a little bit small on your screen there. But if we stick with item number 1, and that's a 3-year term for each council member, that's going to be the top column. Unfortunately, the pointer kind of goes away as I get closer, but that's just in white right there. If you switch everybody to a 4-year term, and that's the transition that you wanted to go to, that's going to be the light gray is what I'm going to refer to it as. It's the second one there. The difficulty with the light gray one, if you did that transition, making everybody a 4-year term, if that's what council wanted to do, is that where you see those orange columns, nobody is up for election. And some people would be perfectly fine with nobody being up for election 1 year. The difficulty with that, though, is that the whole reason why the Charter Review Commission was making this proposed change was to make sure that now that there are a total of 8 people, 8 is more easily divisible by 2. They wanted to make sure only 2 people are elected each election. So if you look at the bottom blue, you'll see on the second option, which would just be to change everybody to a 4-year term, that ends up having some people 1 year with nobody being elected, and then you still have what you have now with 2 election cycles with 3 people, and then 1 election cycle with 2 people. If you go to the third option, and that's supposed to be a light blue column, but I see now as I'm looking closer that that's not showing up on the board. But with that light blue column, or the third one, the goal there was to make the first change in 2021. If you just, again, the goal is to limit the balance or the number of people at any particular election cycle. And if we change the last 2 people, and that's going to be the people who are highlighted in the yellow, what that does, a thought was, if you switch to the 4-year terms, well, you want to get 2 people on a different cycle. So put the newest 2 people to council, try to switch them to a different cycle. But if you just try to switch those people, you end up getting back to the orange column where there's still some election cycles without anybody there. And it's not accomplishing the goal of the Charter Review Commission. So if you just switched starting in 2021, and then you try to amend the last 2 people, the math doesn't work for it. If you get to the green column, that would be delaying the change until 2022. So instead of 2021, this one starts in 2022.
I don't think we should go to 4.
And then you can have some folks in the columns who have a 3-year term, but that transition plan gets you to the point where only 2 people are elected each election cycle. And then the last option, which is in the light orange option, that also gets people to the 2-year term, but it's starting it in 2021. It's a little bit more complicated because some people have 3-year terms, some people have 4-year terms, but that would be a way to phase it to get to the ultimate goal, which was 2 people elected in each election cycle. Mm-hmm. I understand that all of this is contingent on council wanting to transition to a 3 to a 4-year term, but I thought that the discussion or I thought if you showed the transition plan, that might impact council's decision on how to go to a 3-year or 4-year term. If this looked too complicated, if you weren't happy with the transition plans, you might just say, I like it how it is, and then we'll keep it how it is, which is going to be with the top column, 3-year terms for everybody.
Okay. Let me lead the conversation off first. I do not agree with the 4-year term. I believe that the 3-year term has been working real well for us.
Mayor, before we start discussing the new items, we bring the one citizen up that would like to comment.
If what?
We're going to bring the citizen up that would like to comment on this before we get into council discussion.
Okay.
We have one citizen that wants to comment on these proposed charter changes. Scott Pulis, if you'll come up, state your name and your address, limit your talk to 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds. If anyone else would like to, hold on 1 second, like to speak on this, get one of these forms from the city secretary, and you can come up and speak. Go ahead.
Scott Pulis, 3203 Forster Drive, Pearland. I'm not going to take very long. I didn't know this morning that I was going to be speaking on this, but I saw it on the agenda, and I was a little shocked by the idea of going to a 4-year term. When our charter was written, it said 2 3-year terms per city councilman. I think that's pretty reasonable. I'm pretty happy with it. I think most citizens are happy with it. I think that the people who wrote that into the charter knew what they were doing. We've already discovered that it's possible to get around the actual number of terms. If you change positions, you can serve as many terms as you want. So on top of that, to lengthen it to 4 years, I think is pretty unreasonable. City council should not be a career position. We should have a rotation of citizens in and out of our council so that we have a variety of ideas coming in. Different voices get to be heard. I think it's a good thing. If you think about the United States Congress, I think a lot of folks would like to see term limits on that. That's my personal opinion, but we need them on the city council for the same reasons and more. We have a community here that knows each other, and we need more opportunities to have a role on the board. So I would like to see us stay with what we've got. I agree with the mayor. After seeing the presentation, I also think that this would confuse the heck out of the public for at least a few years, and I think we should avoid that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else who would like to speak on the proposed changes?
Okay. I have met fellow council members at meetings and things, and I'll say, how long was your term of office? They say 4 years. Right off, I think, City of Houston, City of Dallas, San Antonio, large, multi-thousand population cities. And when we did our charter back in 1973, we went through that process. Did we want to start off with 4-year terms? No, what we need is for people to have an opportunity to rotate a couple of 3-year terms, and can lay out a year and come back again if that's what they want. But I think that the 3-year term has worked well with us. I think the 4-year term is going to be, I think it's a little too long for people to stay in office, because you can stay in office a little while without having to go through 4-year terms, obviously. And so I would like for us to keep that at 3-year term. Starting with Councilman Owens, let's start with you.
Are we just speaking on this one?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, I say the 3-year term. I don't know any advantage to be on a 4-year term.
Rez?
Thank you, Mayor. I may be an island on this, but I think the pragmatism of what we have right now is that we have a 6-year soft term limit and a 7-member council with a mayor. That means that every year we're going to have an open seat. And I think that if we lengthen the terms, either by having 3 3-year terms or 2 4-year terms, it gives an opportunity to have a little bit more momentum, and a little bit more stability carrying over from year to year to make sure that as we're building and developing things that we can continue on with some projects that we think are best for the citizens. I don't think there's anything wrong with sticking with what we have, but I do think the having an open seat every year I think it disinvites competitiveness to the elections. I think it disinvites momentum with with council continuing to want to move projects forward. And I think it's generally better for our city for us to be able to have some more stability, at least for a longer period of time. So I would vote to do the 4-year terms, or have a discussion where we allow at least a third term. But I do believe that we should maintain the soft limit that we have. That's all I have, Mayor.
Councilman Moore?
Thank you, Mayor. If we're not changing anything on the soft term limit, I don't see that we really need to change to 4-year terms, but I wouldn't be opposed to 4-year terms, but I'd want to probably put something in there where you had a longer time out before you could come back. But I'm not absolutely opposed to the 4-year terms, but I think what we've got right now has been working, so I don't know that we should change it.
Hernandez?
I'm kind of torn on this one. I think that 3 years works fine, but as far as looking at it from gaining institutional memory to a degree, I think that adding additional time to that would be of benefit. Also, we'd had discussions up here about contract lengths and things of that nature as well. I know that there would be some benefit derived from being able to enter into longer contracts, and then having the council members up here be given the opportunity to interact with those longer term contracts, obviously for better pricing and whatnot, I think would be beneficial. But I don't see anything wrong with the current system that we have. So I'm kind of in the middle on this one. I think there's pros and cons to both. I think it will be a very confusing transition, but like I said, I think that there will be some benefit to a 4-year term. However, I'm comfortable with the 3 years. So,
Robert Little?
I like the 3-year term. It's what the city's had for a long time. It's what the citizens are accustomed to. I think switching to 2 4-year terms is a long time. If someone were reelected in the middle of a term, like myself, say they came in after a councilman had to resign for whatever reason after a year, then they could potentially be on council for 11 years. I think that's just too long. I'm all for leaving it the way it is. I think if you switch to 4-year terms, you're going to see more occurrences of councilmen having to leave city council for whatever reason when you're on there for that long. So I'm fine with 3.
Reed?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm definitely in favor of leaving it the way that it is. And for the reasons, some of them have been mentioned, some of them haven't. Size was mentioned. We struggle to even get people to apply for some of the boards and commissions that we have. And so it makes no sense for us to extend this to say, hey, look, let's let people sit up here for 8 years. It definitely doesn't deter competition. When there's an open seat, that encourages people to say, hey, look, I want to run. A lot of folks don't want to run against an incumbent. They don't think they have a chance. They don't try to raise the proper money. When you see an open seat, we get good people that would be more encouraged to actually be involved. And like I said, right now we have trouble with involvement. Voting, I don't see a situation where we would not want a May election in our city. This isn't Houston, right? And so, and we need to encourage voting in general. And so, having an election every year, it's not a huge cost on the city. And frankly, that's not anything that I've ever seen us discuss in our budget sessions. Like, oh, we're spending too much money on voting. We spend a lot of money on a lot of crap. But, I think voting is something that we definitely, need to continue to encourage just in general in our city. I think there was mention, maybe not this meeting, but of someone not obtaining the proper knowledge. We meet a lot. I mean, we, specifically between July and the end of October, I think we may have 2 Mondays off. And so if you can't gain the knowledge that's needed in, at least the first 1.5, 2 years of being on this council, that's ridiculous. You probably shouldn't be up here in the first place. So, Councilmember Orlando last meeting made, a couple of great comments that, you kind of see him coming along. And And contracts, I think we took care of that, with requiring that they be reviewed every, so many years, so that we, as council members, get a turn at kind of making a decision on those. But I only see trouble. I only see repetitiveness. I don't see involvement from 4-year terms. Right now, again, we're not Houston, we're not San Antonio, we're not Dallas, like the mayor said. And Houston just switched from 2-year terms to 4-year terms, and so they still have an overlap to where there's an open seat. So we need to encourage people to run, encourage people to get involved, and leaving an open seat every cycle does just that.
Yeah, I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think it's a really important question. How do you balance the need for stability versus new ideas and preserving that institutional knowledge, but also having a fresh perspective? From my perspective, I think this change, I think our elections and how we choose our leaders in the city, I think there are some significant problems, and to me, this doesn't really address any of them. I think we've seen a lot of runoff elections where we then have lower participation even than the first round. And so we have a very, very small minority of people who are shaping elections. I think we've seen in terms of keeping people on, is 4 years going to make people stay on too long? I mean, we effectively don't have term limits. So if that's an issue, there are other fixes available that this is not. And further, in our elections, they've gotten particularly nasty as people just say, oh, let me get into those top 2 people at whatever costs versus let me appeal to a broad swath of the electorate that people have done. For example, in other systems that have adopted ranked choice voting or some other systems like that. So I do think this is an important conversation. How do we balance stability versus new ideas? I don't know that this really gets us there. I guess my other question, as being the newest member of this council, would be just philosophically, we're not actually voting on this tonight, whether or not we are going to allow 4-year terms. We're asking whether or not this is going to go to the voters. I guess I would like some kind of, from members of our staff who do have more of that institutional knowledge, how much deference has been given to the committee who, I've written bylaws for several private organizations. I know they spent a long time working on that. Do we let that go for a vote and hash out this conversation further until we get to that May election? Or would there be, is it common that items would be stricken before it got to that point by this council?
Traditionally, the manner in which the process begins with the Charter Review Commission, they sort of narrow down what they believe is important based on their own observations from the charter as well as staff feedback during the charter review process. And then their report that is generated is based upon those meetings that take place over about a 5-month period. Then those are presented to the council, and the report as we did previously. And that's sort of the time when the council evaluates. The Charter Review Commission is sort of essentially appointed by the council to do exactly what you talked about. That doesn't take away the right of the council to carry on further discussions and go further and make additional recommendations and changes. As far as the timeline is concerned, that we're talking May 2020 election. Of course, we'll be calling an election early next year. And so the critical time element for us is to identify what the changes are going to be, what's going to go to the voters so that the language can be wordsmithed, go through it and get it very clear and concise so that it's not confusing to the voters. And then there are notices and publications that have to take place in the paper as well. So ideally, we would like to make that determination here this fall. It doesn't have to be done tonight, but generally speaking, this is about the time frame we do so.
If I may add, Councilmember Orlando, the 2013 Charter Review Commission, the council gave great deference to them, and all of their proposed amendments were pushed to the voters. However, the Charter Review Commission is an advisory body, and the City Council does not have to rubber stamp the things that they do. An example of that would be the 2009 Charter Review Commission. Not all of the proposed changes were sent to the voters, and for the 2005 Charter Review Commission, only some of the proposed changes were sent to the voters. So historically speaking, the council has not accepted all of the proposed changes and sent them to the voters. That's just the dates that I'm aware of because I worked with the Charter Review Commissions during those time periods. My institutional knowledge prior to that is lacking.
So can we make a motion to delete or remove one of the items from?
Yes, sir. I think our goal is to get a poll of items 1 through 9 to determine which ones will go to the voters. And I think Mr. Coker was going to lead that process if council's ready to do that now.
Did anybody else have any comments about the other ones? We just talked about that. So I guess.
Next item.
Yeah, I just. Misdemeanor fine for the amount of 200 to 500 on a council subpoena. How many times have we used that where we actually charge somebody with a fine?
To the best of my recollection, 0. Mr. Coker's been here a little bit longer than I have, though.
In 22 years, I've not seen that used.
Yeah, so why did we want to raise it $300?
I think the Charter Review Commission was looking at things that were happening throughout the state and nation and how people were ignoring the legislative body's prerogative to do investigations and wanted to put a little bit of meat to it. And that's where that came from.
Okay, because I just wondered, because I've never had seen us to do that, and I was just wondering why it went up, the way it was, if it was for some reason. But so I really don't care if it does raise up to 500. I just assume to see it. If we're not going to use it, just leave it at 200. I don't see anything, any reason why we should. That's
We
all.
ready for 302?
Just a quick question on that. I don't know the extent to which this is permissible in a city charter, but could we just index some of these to inflation and avoid having this discussion altogether as we do this?
I'm not too sure I understand the question.
I'm sorry. For example, we're saying we raise it from $200 to $500. We're going back and saying we do this process every 4 years, so periodically we're going to need to bump up the amounts because $200 in 1990 is not the same as $200 now. Could we just index these so that they periodically go up with CPI or something?
Yes, sir. I believe in order to enact a fine, you have to specifically state what the fine amount is pursuant to Texas criminal law.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And just to clarify, that particular fine, it's actually that amount for each day that the person is violating the subpoena.
That stays on.
Is that a Class C misdemeanor?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 500, I believe, is the top range of the.
It is.
There are possibilities to have a Class C misdemeanor be significantly more than a $500 fine, but if you don't state what the specific penalty is, the general penalty clause would be a $500 cap.
Okay.
Can you give us an example of what that would be like? It says council subpoena non-compliance, and says, like you said, is per day if they don't comply. What would that be? What's an indication of it?
That would be an example of if the council were investigating one of your employees or something of that nature, and where as part of your investigation you have subpoena powers, you requested that information, and that individual failed to comply with the council's directive.
And would that have to be a supermajority vote to do that?
No, to issue a subpoena? No, that would just be a simple majority.
No, to apply it would automatically apply if they didn't.
Are we ready for item 302?
I think we're getting general feedback from all of them before we poll council to determine which ones we want. Right now, the discussion is on 302. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. The discussion is on 3.12, the third item.
And just so you know, council, the items 2 through 6, when we met and discussed these previously, the general consensus from council at that time was that these were very minor revisions and that there was no objection at that time. However, if there's anything that's changed and if council would like to offer any input on items 2 through 6, feel free to do so at this time.
I have a comment on item 2. somebody mentioned, I think the gentleman that got up to speak mentioned Congress. And I mean, you don't even have to live in the district to run, for Congress. You can move in and just run. Seen it happen. But, anyways, yeah, changing this from 6 to 12 months is, I mean, again, we're really like pushing, hey, look, don't get involved in this city. I do think you need some residency here. I don't see any issue with that. And in fact, from what I understand, from talking to Councilmember Orlando, it seems like I guess the state's pushing for no residency requirements. But you should know the land, the lay of the land. But you know what? If you don't, you're not going to get elected anyways, right? And so, and people in Pearland are going to ask, how long have you lived here? Where do you live? And those are good questions that should be asked. I don't know that we need to pick up the requirement from 6 to 12 months, but again, that's just my 2 cents. I wish we always had 10 people applying for, every one of the boards and commissions that we have, but we don't. And I wish we had great candidates, for council and just for everything else. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents on that.
We were talking about from 6 months to 12 months in residency.
That's what Member Reed was talking about. We're taking general questions or comments about items, well, any of the items. At this
Okay,
point.
any of the items, okay. I think it ought to stay at 12, move it to 12 months. I think a person needs to be able to figure out where the best place for the organizations are and what the issues are. 6 months doesn't take you long to present long enough to find out what the issues are in the community. And item 12, 312, I think it ought to move from $200 to $500. And in 2006, I think we need 10 days. If you've been involved in any of the recall petition completeness, it's a difficult thing to do from the staff, a lot of paperwork. So 10 days, I think, is a good move. 2008, 802, I think we need to make sure that our budget is, it's a valuable tool that we work with, must be adopted in accordance with state law. And I think the wording is such, in the present charter, it's a little more wordy and it's a little confusing. So this wording, I think, clears that up. And 10,000, item 6 is Charter Review Commission from 5 to 7. We have 70 council members. I think we ought to need 7 Charter Review Commissioners. Councilmember Owens, let's start with you and go through the row here.
Yeah.
Good. Have you already talked?
I have.
That's all you want to say about any of them?
Yeah, but we don't have that much time.
Okay, you can tune in later. Okay. Perez?
Thank you, Mayor. I think excluding 1, which we talked about ad nauseum, I think 2 through 15 are all valuable changes. I would recommend we accept the recommendations of the Charter Review Committee.
Second.
So more? Hernandez?
I've got nothing else to add. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Little?
No further comment.
Yes, Member Reed?
No other comments, Mayor.
Councilmember Rolando?
I'm finished as well, Mayor.
I think the rest of the items are acceptable to the council as presented.
You have clear.
Just, well, what I would like to do is just, we can do a vote by raising of hands, but I would like to do it in 2 different ways. If what I understand to be correct, items 2 through 9 it sounds like all the council's agreeable to send those to the voters. Would y'all like to do a separate vote on item number 1, or would you like to include that in there?
No, I think that needs to be separate.
Okay. So if somebody would want to make a motion to approve the proposed charter review amendments as discussed in this meeting, items 2 through 9, and we can do a simple vote by raising of the hand.
Yeah, I'll move that we move Charter Amendment items 2 through 9.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. You ready to call for a vote?
Mayor,
on that?
I was going to say a simple vote by raising the hand. Since this is not a resolution or an ordinance, it does not have to be a record vote by voice.
Raise your hand there, man. 229.
My count, that looks like 7 individuals raised their hands. So by a vote of 7-0, items 2 through 9 would go on to the voters in May 2020. And then the final item would be a motion to change the term of office from 3 to 4 years. And then, of course, if you did go that route and wanted to do that, a separate discussion as we found out on how you would transition. So there would have to be a motion for that as well.
Those we would vote those in favor of the 3-year term would put their hands up, and then those with 4-year term put their hands up.
The issue is whether or not to send it to the voters. So if those in favor of sending item number 1 to the voters, we would need a raising of the hands that would support doing so.
I would vote
Make a
not to
motion
change
that
it.
we vote on whether to send item 3.01 to the voters.
Second.
Second.
What else you need?
If we could have a raising of the hands of those supporting sending item number 1 to the voters. Okay. All right. I count 1, and then if you could raise your hands supporting or not supporting sending item number 1 to the voters. I count 6, so that looks like that would not go to the voters based on a vote of 6-1.
Okay.
In terms of next steps,
Is there any other items to be determined at this point?
No, Mayor, I think Lawrence was going to make a quick wrap-up comment here. Thank you.
Okay, let me adjourn this item, which is item 1, regular council meeting, special council meeting.
There, I think Lawrence wanted to make one more.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Lawrence, you like to make a comment?
I was just going to say what you should expect would be sometime in February, a resolution, or whenever you call the election, the ballot will have the resolution with the items that you just voted on accordingly when we call that election.
We'd be targeting a May election, right?
Yes, sir. So it'll be sometime February, early March when the resolution will come in front of you.
Look at my agenda. Item 3 says adjourn, which I shall so at 6:50.